depending when you're watching this, Christmas is nearly coming. Yeah, if you're watching it in January or February, maybe you don't want to talk about it. But these are great little gifts that are fantastic for Christmas, fantastic for any other time of year. We've got Christmas fabric and we have normal fabric. These are little drawstring bags. You can put chocolates in, threads, or whatever little gift you want to go and give to the person that you want to give it to. Or hang them off a tree. Why not? And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to make them. So let's get over to the cutting mat. And if you haven't been here before, I'm Kim. This is Quilt with Kim. You're very welcome. Let's go get making them. These little drawstring bags then, this one is made of Christmas fabric with a Christmas fabric liner inside. This one has got only 2 chocolates inside. There were more. Somebody has been eating them. But they work by this drawstring here, just pulls up and then you can tie it into a half knot like that. So little gifts in there. You don't have to make it out of Christmas fabric, so any scraps that you've got kicking around in your stash will absolutely do as well. You don't need much. So you can make them for any time of year to put little gifts in, but they look great around Christmas. Very easy to give little table presents or tree presents or just little gifts you're visiting. So what do you need fabric-wise? You will need 2 pieces of fabric per bag. You will need an outer fabric and an inner fabric. You can make them out of the same fabric. I would suggest having a dark and a light just to have a bit of a contrast, or different fabrics, so that the inside shows differently to the outside. So your outside fabric here is 5 inches across by 10.5 inches in length. And don't worry if you're scrabbling around trying to write things down. I'll pop the measurements in the description below for you. So 5 inches across, 10.5 inches down. Now your inner fabric here is just slightly narrower. So this is 4.5 inches wide by 10.5 inches long. Okay. So as I said, check down in the description below and you'll find the measurements of these. So you need 1 piece of each. You'll need some thread to match. So what I suggest is, just for stitching them together, just get a neutral thread. Don't stress it too much. You could use a green for this particular one, but a grey, dark grey or a beige or something. So don't worry about the colour, just get a neutral thread. But we're going to do a little bit of top stitching to finish. So you might want to get a couple of threads that would look good on the top stitching here, but I will cover that when we get to that part. So you need 2 pieces of fabric. You're going to need some twine or some ribbon to make the drawstring at the end. These twines here, I just picked these up in the local supermarket. When they start selling all their Christmas wrapping, you get packs of 3 for very not much money at all, when you get loads and loads and loads. So there's that. Obviously craft stores will sell them. Any kind of thin ribbon will do as well. So it's that. You will need a safety pin. We're going to need that to do the drawstring. I would get a pokey stick of some kind, but I do like my tweezers. You'll need your scissors and your rotary cutter, obviously, to do your cutting out, and a couple of pins, and obviously your sewing machine. So I will leave you to cut this out, okay? So you can either just measure a little template, make a template on a piece of brown paper or something like that, even photocopy a paper, measure it out, cut it out and use that as a pattern. Or if you've got a rotary cutter and your ruler, you can measure it and cut it out as you probably would normally for piecing. So either way is absolutely fine. So once you've cut those out, we're going to meet back in the next little section and I'll show you what to do next. First up, we're going to get our outer fabric. Now, I've got a very temporary ironing mat, which is a towel and lots of layers of insulated wadding underneath. This is not something I'd necessarily recommend for ironing, but I can fit my camera over the top of it. And if you've been watching me for a while, no, I still haven't got my cutting. my little portable cutting mat. One of these days I will surprise you. So get your outer fabric, turn it over so it is right side down. And then you're going to get an iron and you're going to, let's get that a bit more on camera, just flip it over, fold it over about 1/4 inch. You don't need to worry about measuring it too much. Maybe just get a little bit of a measurement to start with. I tend to eyeball it. And then you want to press that down so we get a nice 1/4 of an inch fold all the way along. Okay, that's one side. And then you're going to flip it round, turn it round like that, and do exactly the same on the other side. Just turn it over to the wrong side by about 1/4 inch and give it a good press like that. And then what I do for good measure is just turn it so the wrong side is facing down and give it a good press all over. That just helps to keep those edges nice and crisp. Okay, so that's job one. I'm going to divide this video into lots of little sections so you can pause at the end of each section, do it if you're following along, and then you can do the next bit. So we've got a pause coming up and then we'll move on to the next bit. Next up, we take this outer fabric, so the folds are facing downwards, okay, and we're going to fold it in half lengthways. Now, just a little word, I'm going to put a little PS just in this bit. If you have a directional fabric like these robins here, you will find on your finished bag that you've got robins facing the right way up on one side of the bag and they're upside down on the other side of the bag. That's just going to happen with a directional fabric. Personally, I'm not that bothered about it, but if you are bothered, I would probably change your fabric to something else. But do you know, don't stress it. It's just fabric. It's a good scrap buster. Whoever's going to receive this will love it, so just go with it. So we've got our outer facing wrong side down. We're going to flip that up so that we have got it folded in half lengthways. You're going to get your ruler. I've got a quilting ruler, but if you're not a quilter, just a standard ruler will do. You're just going to mark a couple of measurements. So with your quilting ruler or your ruler, you're going to measure down from the top raw edge. So this raw edge here, the open edge at the top, we're going to make a little marking 1 inch down. Okay, it's just a little marking there. I'm going to show you close up under the camera. Can you see here? It's just a little marking. This is just a guideline for you, so nobody else is going to see it. So I've got 1 inch pencil line there, just a little mark, and then I'm going to do another 1 3/4 of an inch down. So we'll end up with a little gap here. So if I show you close up, you can see I've got one little mark there, that's the inch down, and another little mark there, that's 1 3/4 inches down. So having done that on one side, you're going to do exactly the same on the opposite side. And again, all this is doing is giving you a little mark. So 1 inch down here, and then 1 3/4 inches down. So you will end up with a matching pair of measurements: 1 inch down, 1 3/4, 1 inch down, 1 3/4. And what that is that will form your channel for your drawstring a bit later on. Okay, so we've got that bit. So if you do that bit, now we're going to have a look at the inner, but I'm going to do a little pause so you can pause this video and do that bit, and I'll see you in a second. Now we're going to take our inner fabric. We're going to do pretty much the same thing. We're folding this up. And by the way, this hasn't got any folded edges on it. This is just raw edge all the way around. So we're going to fold that up so it's folded in half. You've got the fold at the bottom, you've got the raw edge at the top. We're going to get a pencil again. You don't need to measure this one. And then about an inch or so up from one of the bottoms, it doesn't matter which one, just give yourself a little line. And then about another inch, inch and a half. Don't stress it. This is not an exact measurement. This is going to be your hole where you turn it through. So you want a big enough hole to turn it through. I'll measure that for you just so you know. That's about 1.25 inches, but if it's 1.5 inches, it's fine. If it's just over 1 inch, that's fine too. So you want a gap, and I'll show those up. So there's the bottom fold. We've got a gap here of about 1 inch, and then the first little marker line. Then there's a gap here. We're going to leave that. We're not going to stitch that. Then we've got our second marker line there, and then the rest of the fabric goes up to the top. So those are both ready. You don't need to do that on the other side, by the way. Both of these are now ready to go over to our sewing machine. So if you get on and do that, and I'll meet you over at the machine. We're at the machine then. So the first thing that you want is to thread your machine up, obviously. If you're wondering about needle size, you either want a 70-10 or an 80/12 needle. Either of those would be absolutely fine. Thirdly, you want your stitch width to be set at 5.5 if you're on a computerized machine. That'll put your needle in the right place so that we can sew 1/4 inch. So for everybody else, you want 1/4 inch away from the edge. And if you don't know quite where that is, probably what you need to do is get your needle over to the right hand side and then measure the distance between your needle and the edge of the foot. What we are going to do is sew the outer on the edges. So we are going to sew 1/4 inch away from the edge. So we're going to put the edge against the edge of the foot. Don't worry, I'll show you in a minute. We're going to stitch down to that first little marker. Do you remember that 1 inch marker that we made? We're going to lock stitch. That means you come forward, you go backwards, you come forwards again and carry on. So we're lock stitch, we come to that little marker there. We're going to stop and do another lock stitch. Then we're going to take it out from the machine and we're going to start again at the second marker, that 1 3/4 marker. Start there and go right to the end and lock stitch. And we're going to do that on both sides. So we leave this gap here unstitched because this becomes our channel, as I said. So let's put this under the machine. All right, so I already have it set up for 1/4 inch seam allowance. So that means the distance between my needle here and the edge of my foot here is 1/4 inch. Sorry, I know the light is shining. I have put a bit of tape over it, but it hasn't helped very much. I don't know if I can zoom in a little bit. Let's just see if that helps. Might help a tiny bit. There we go. So we've got 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to pop my needle down without knocking cameras going flying. And this machine happens to do an automatic lock stitch, but you'll see that it comes forward, it goes backwards, and then it comes forwards again, and that's a lock stitch. And you can see the little marker there. I'm going to stop when I'm level with it, and then I'm going to lock stitch again, so it goes backwards and forwards. Okay. So that's that top bit, and then I'm going to start again from that second little marker. So I can just see it through the little aperture. Is it called an aperture? The little gap in my foot. I can just see it through there. I know you probably can't, but it is just in that gap there. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. So I'm dropping my needle and we're going to do a lock stitch. So forwards, backwards, forwards, and this time we're going right to the end. You want to get as close as you can to the end, so you might have to judge where your stitches are, because if you stop too soon you'll get a little gap. So we're lock stitching there. Okay, so that's one side all stitched. We'll tidy up the twizzles in a minute, the tails, and we'll do exactly the same this side. So I'm going to start from the bottom this time. And if that is showing, can you see there's a little sort of overlap here? That's just because I haven't pulled those round, but honestly don't worry, it's not going to make a lot of difference if it's not quite matching. I'm a great believer that I'll show you stuff that doesn't quite work out for me either, because it happens to all of us. And in this one, just don't sweat it. If you can get it perfect, get it perfect. Otherwise, don't worry about it. Life's too short. It's Christmas. We're supposed to be enjoying ourselves. So, needle down. Again, lock stitch. And this time we're going to stop at where we can see our little marker. Okay, so it's lock stitched. And then get the second marker in sight. It's all come undone. Let's get to the edge and then needle down, lock stitch, and then just to the edge. And then we can lock stitch there. Okay, so if we have a little recap, this is what you should end up with, is a stitch line from the top raw edge down to that first marker for your gap. You will have left a gap, and then it starts again with a lock stitch, goes to the end, and you've got a lock stitch at the end. And if we turn it round to the other side, we've got exactly the same thing going on. We've got a stitch line starting with a lock stitch, going up to our first marker there, it's lock stitch, that's finished. There's a gap, that's just loose thread, and then it starts again, lock stitch to the end and lock stitch. And as I said, if we've got a little tiny overlap, don't sweat the small stuff on this one. So we can put that to one side and go get our lining. So I'll do that in the next little section. So if you do that, and I'll meet you in the next bit. We're going to do the inner now, but I'm going to let you into a tiny secret. I'd started recording this section and then our Sainsbury's delivery arrived. Oh, the glamorous lifestyle that I have to have a supermarket delivery arrive on a Saturday afternoon when I'm recording this for you. Anyway, I got chatting to the delivery guy and he says, oh, my wife sews and is making a quilt at the moment for his son. Who loves turtles, or his and his wife's son loves turtles, so his wife's making a turtle quilt. So I said I would say hello to his wife, say hello, but your husband put me off because I came back to resume and I've managed to stitch entirely through the gap that I said that I need you to leave clear. So I am starting this again, but you haven't seen the other bit, so nothing to see here. So we are going to tackle the inner section now. So do you remember we made little markings at the bottom of this one? They don't have to be an exact measurement. We need about 1.25 1.5 gap left. Okay, so this time we're going to start with a top stitch at the top here. Oops, at the top. We're going to run a 1/4 inch seam down and we're going to stop at the first line here, make a little lock stitch. We're going to leave that gap and then start with a lock stitch and carry on to the end and lock stitch there. So let's get on with that. So needle down, start with a lock stitch, and we'll get to the first gap or the first little marker. Okay, let's do a lock stitch there. And then leave the gap and then put your needle down. I guess the moral of the story is don't have your supermarket deliveries in the middle of stitching. Okay, and we just get to the end there and lock stitch there. Anyway, I think it's nice to chat to people, and we are all one big community, aren't we? at the end of the day. So I'm switching it around and doing the other side, and on this side we're literally going straight up. There's nothing to stop for. So we need to start with the lock stitch again and straight up. Okay, and lock stitch at the end. Okay, and that is our inner done. Now you can see here I've used a grey thread on the white. Honestly, it won't matter, you will not see this. So if you do that bit, I'm going to get this onto the cutting mat because there's one little job that we need to do before we put the two pieces together. So I'll see you in the next little section. So once we've stitched our inner, what I want you to do is just turn it the right way out. So just find the gap at the top, which has obviously decided to be difficult. Just turn it the right way through. Don't worry too much about the seams or anything yet. Okay, and do you see, this is what I mean about if you've got a directional fabric, on one side it will be facing the right way and then on the other side it will be upside down. Honestly, don't worry about it. Now what we're going to do is get a measurement 1.5 inches down from this top raw edge from the opening. So the easiest way of doing that, it just depends what ruler that you've got. I've got a quilting ruler, so it's a bit easier to manage, but if you've got a standard ruler, just make some markings and measure down. What you'll want to do is measure down 1 3/4 inches. Okay, so there's my 1 3/4 line coming down here. And I want to make sure that it's all nicely squared up, and I'm going to put myself, and this is on the right side of the fabric, you haven't made a mistake anywhere, we're going to do a little pencil line. It's just enough for you to see. So you can't see that from there, but it is, can you see that there, cutting Father Christmas in half, going through there? And we want to do exactly the same on the other side. All will become clear in a moment. So same thing again, 1 3/4. And we want a pencil line, which we can see on that side as well. So if I followed it round, you can see it's the same pencil line, comes all the way around. Okay, so having done that, then turn it the wrong way out again. Okay, I know this sounds a bit, what is she doing? Just go along with it. I promise it'll all work out. So if you do that bit, and we'll meet in the next section. Before I go further, I am going to snip any loose threads off just to have a bit of a tidy up, just to make sure they're all gone. So if you're following along, now would be an excellent time to cut all your twizzles and your end threads. And where it's come unravelled a bit, that just happens. That wasn't a thread. I think we're done. Oh no, there's one there. Then when you've done that, we're going to get our outer section and just finger press these seams open. If you want to get your iron on it, you can do. Or if you've got one of those little roller things that press the seams, you can do that too. But we want to press those seams. And you'll see here that we've got the little gap. Okay, that's will make our drawstring channel. So press those seams open, ditto on the other side. Okay, whoops, missed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn that the right way around. I know what I'm doing, honest. And then I would spend just a second, get a pointy stick of some description and just poke those corners out carefully. So that outer bag is now the right way showing out, and your inner is the wrong side facing out. That's what we want. So we're going to take our outer and I'm going to put it inside the inner bit. Okay, I promise this will work if you haven't done this before. So my pattern, my right side of the fabric is the inside. So what ends up happening is we have our right sides together. Can you see? So when all this works, the right sides together. So I've got my fingers in the bag and I'm just going to push that in to that. I'm using my pokey stick again. A pencil will do, tweezers will do. I'm just going to push those corners in. Now what I want to make sure is that these top raw edges all match up and line up properly, and I need to make sure that these seams match up properly. So if I grab a pin, get those seams, sorry I keep falling off the bottom of the screen, get those seams open. And they will like to close up on you because they're doing it here. So let's match that seam and stick a pin in. That seems to be the world's longest pin known to man. And then twizzle it around the other side. Let's get that seam open. Press those open. Match that seam there. Can you see what I'm doing is matching the seam. Stick a pin in that, and if I give it a few tugs and a bit of smoothing and stroking with my thumbs, I can make sure that these raw edges at the top all nicely match round. Okay, so if you do that bit, and then we're going to get back to the machine to stitch those two pieces together. How am I going to do that, I hear you say? Don't panic, I've got you covered. I'll see you in 1 second. To stitch this then, we want to stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge. Normally, if you've got something circular, you can take your accessory holder off, and this section here is where you would put circular things, but that isn't going to fit. So, how to tackle these? We start from the inside. We need to get our foot in the middle of one of the flat sections. Okay, so not on a seam. Never start stitching on a seam, just as a matter of course. So I'm getting my foot in the middle there, and I'm going to put it down. So if I zoom in a little bit and adjust where my camera is, I'm not sure that's any clearer, to be honest. You can see I've got the inside of the bag here, and it's against the edge of the foot here. I'm hoping that you can see that. So I'm still on 1/4 of an inch. I haven't changed that bit, and I haven't changed my thread yet. We still want to finish on a lock stitch, or start and finish. So let me put my needle down. Stop knocking the camera. We have to do this carefully because we haven't got much wriggle room really. So you want to keep as much space in front of your foot clear as you can. So let's take this slow. So let's get a lock stitch in. Can you see I'm holding this top bit of the bag out of the way? Okay, so I've come forward a little bit, but now you can see that the fold here is beginning to get in the way. But that means at the back, some of my little bag has been released. So I can shuffle forward, pull a little bit of the fabric forward here. And actually, as I'm coming up to this pin, I'm going to take the pin out and hold it in place, and I want to make sure that seam is open. Okay, so just a little bit of fiddling as you come up to it. Let's capture that. Same thing again, just shuffle my bag forward as it starts getting in the way of itself. Still 1/4 of an inch. And as it turns around, I can pull this back to the front. As it releases the fabric, you'll find this is very easy. It looks probably more complicated than it actually is if you're a beginner. Okay, so I'm still holding this top bit out of the way, keeping this bottom area flat and free of wrinkles. I'm coming up to this second seam, so I'm going to take the pin out. I'm holding it with my fingers, making sure that this inner seam is open. It's quite important because we need to form our channel through that seam. Okay, shuffle it forward a bit. Sometimes you need to sort the fabric out, give it a bit of a tidy up. Straight through there, and we should be matching up with our beginning of the stitch line. You probably can't see that, but it's just here at the end of my fingernail. I'm going to carry on till I meet that and then pop another lock stitch in there. Alright, so can you see that the top of your bag there has been stitched all the way around? Alright, so do that, and then next section we'll turn it through. Before we go any further, I'm just going to cut off any loose threads that I've created and get rid of any loose bits and twiggles and tangles that all happen. Then a little bit of magic happens. So do you remember this gap that we left earlier and you didn't stitch through because your supermarket delivery was arriving? I'm going to pull the inner through, the outer through that hole. So if you open it up, you'll find that the outer is inside there. So this is where tweezers come into use. If you haven't got tweezers, just get your finger in there, and I'm going to pull it through that hole. And I'm going to keep going until it's all pulled through. There you go, magic. So we've got our outer and we've got our inner. Now, if you've still got your pokey stick, before we close this hole up, I'm going to get my pokey stick right inside that hole, poke any corners out, make sure my seams are crisp. Sorry, I keep dropping off the screen. Let's poke my corners out, make sure this corner is poked out as well. And let's cut those loose threads off. It's very fraying, this fabric, isn't it? And then if you just finger press, so this is the gap just here, so that's where we've just pulled everything through on the lining. If you just finger press there, and then we're going to stitch that down, but I'll do it together with you in the next section. So the gap is here, and I want to stitch very close to the edge just to close that gap up. I've still got my grey thread. Quite honestly, if you've got a different colour, you could use it. If you really want it hidden, switch over to a matching thread. I'm not going to bother because it's the inside of the bag and nobody will see it. So I'm going to put the edge of my fabric about halfway across the foot, sorry, about 3/4 of the way across the foot. I just want my needle to be nearly on the edge, probably about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge. I know that's almost impossible for you to see on the camera. I do understand, I can't get my camera right in there. In fact, let me just see if I can move it. So like a roving reporter. I don't know if you can see that close enough. So the edge of the fabric here is probably lining up just to the edge of, you know, the funny little aperture or the hole that you've got on your foot. It's just on the right hand edge of that on the inside. So my needle lands about 1/8 of an inch just under that on the fabric. So I've done that, so that's all positioned. Let's drop my needle down, and I'm just going to do a little lock stitch and close that gap up. I'm really close to the edge, and you don't need to go very far because it was only about 1 1/4 inches, wasn't it, that we decided in the end. All right, so you've closed that gap off. Cut the twizzles off, and then I will show you what to do next in the next little section. See you in a sec. So having chopped off any of the little twizzles or loose threads, I'm going to give that a quick iron. Okay, and then we are going to put, if you open it up in the center, I'm going to tuck the inside into the outside. You see, it's all beginning to turn into a bag now. It's like magic, this. So get that all in there. You'll feel all bunched up at the bottom. So if we get our pokey stick back again and put that inside, and I can straighten up all the bottoms, if you like, and make sure all the seams are matching. So give it a good bit of welly inside to get it all nicely lining up inside the bag there. And then we want to make sure that these top edges are nice and crisp and even. Those are the words, as it's Christmas. So nicely lined up at the top. And what I suggest is give those a quick press. Before we do the next bit, because it will really help you. Pressing your fabric and pressing your project as you go through really helps the whole stitching process. It helps hold the fabric in place. It just holds the whole thing together so much better for you and makes each stage of your stitching a lot easier. So we've got that ready. Now what I'd like you to do that, and then swap your threads over in your machine. So I've been stitching with grey, as you know, but this time we're going to do some top stitching. So I don't think I want grey on my robins here, because we're going to see the stitching on the top here, and we're going to see the stitching on the inside here, on the inner. Now top stitching is exactly the same as all other stitching. It just means that your stitch line will show. So that's where you can get a bit decorative if you want to, and choose a different type of thread. So I've chosen a nice red thread that I'm going to use to go on to the outer of the bag to match my robins, and I'm putting a white thread to match the inner lining. Now the way we are going to sew this, I know the lining feels like it's on the bottom, but we're going to be sewing like we sewed the other bit just a second ago when we sewed the tops together. We're going to be sewing from here. So what you want to do is put the thread that's matching your lining, you want to put that in the spool on the top of your machine. So it's the main thread that you're stitching with on the top of your machine, just where you put your normal reel. So in my case, my white thread is going to go on the top of my machine, and then my red thread is going to be on my bobbin, or in my bobbin, and that's the bit that will show on the outer. I know it might be a bit difficult to get your head around, but I promise this will work. So if you've got a thread that's matching the outer, put that in your bobbin, and the thread that matches the inner, that's your reel of thread that just goes on the top spool that you thread your machine up with normally. So if you get this pressed, get your machine threaded up with whatever threads you want, and I'll meet you in the next section. Okay, so we're all threaded up and ready for our top stitching then. So this time we're going to do a top stitch 1/4 inch around this top rim, just like we did when we were stitching the tops together a few moments ago. But this time we're stitching it again. That stops it sort of raveling up and getting all rucking up. It just keeps it all nice and flat and steady and together really. So we're going to top stitch round. So just like before, we start in this middle section here, we open up that little bag and we get it underneath our foot, making sure nothing's caught up anywhere. We hold this top section out of the way, and I'm going to put my foot down with the edge of the top of the bag against the foot here, and just like before, we're stitching 1/4 inch. So needle down. Let's try not to knock the camera flying. And we start with a lock stitch again. And can you see why I said put the thread that matches the liner or your inner on the top reel, because this is what's now stitching on top or on your inner. So even though it's on the inner, it's on the top. I know. This is why sewing is so good for your brain, because, and it really is good for your brain, I'm not making that up, because it helps all the new neurons to develop. I'm sure there's a better scientific explanation, but that'll do for now. So as before, we're just pulling it forward, making sure that it's all kept nice and taut as well, because we don't want any little ruckles or anything forming. So I'm not pulling against the needle, but I am holding it quite taut, or taut enough so that we don't get any wrinkles. Let's pull that all the way around. Just keep going. We'll come up to the second seam. Okay, nearly there. Now you've got this, I've got this thread where I started. I can either cut it off now or wait to the end. I'm actually going to cut it off now because I'm a bit worried that's going to get in the way. See, did you see there was a crease forming there? So I really want to make sure that we're keeping it all flat, out of the way. And we should be, there we go, there's the beginnings that you probably can't see that on the camera. I can't see it on my screen, but the beginning of the stitch line is there. You will be able to see it when you're doing this, and I will be matching up with that and then giving it a lock stitch. So that's the first top stitch line, and you can see on my outer I've got a nice red stitch line going all the way round the bag. Okay, there's twizzles on the back, let's get rid of those before we do the next bit. And then, do you remember those pencil lines that we drew on the lining on the outside of it? They will be appearing somewhere in here. Can you see? So if I open the bag a bit further down, well, 1 3/4 inches down, you can see that that pencil line is there. So we need to stitch on that. This is probably the most tricky bit out of the whole bag, but I know you can do it. It's not that complicated, but I absolutely know that you can do it. So let's have a little challenge. Now, the easiest way to do this is to pop your needle back into the central position. If you're on a computerized machine, put your stitch width down to 3.5 and you'll find that that magically puts your needle in the central position. If you've got a dial, it's probably about 3.5 on your stitch width. If you just move your dial from left to right, you'll see where your needle falls in the central position. It's just a bit easier to follow a line when it's in the central position. So once you've got it there, we'll shuffle it all the way under. So it's just the same technique as before, really. But can you see I've got markings on my foot, or if you look at your foot, because you probably won't be able to see that very well, but if you look at your foot, you'll find little markings right in the centre of your foot. And if you line that pencil line up with that marking, your needle will fall into that, onto the line, okay? So you don't need to look at the needle, but you do need to look at the markings on your foot. So this is what we're trying to do, is stitch along that line. And just like before, we're going to stitch all the way around the bag and we're going to follow that line. So it's just a case of steady as she goes and follow that line along. So the technique is no different to all the other stitching we've done, where we have to shuffle the bag out of the way and just take a little bit at a time. Make sure you're smoothing it as you go, and even if you have to do a couple of stitches and then stop again to smooth it out, that's fine. It's not a very big bag, so we're not going to be here for very long. Once you've made one of these, they're really quick to make. So I know this tutorial is going to be longer than 10 minutes or so that it would take to make it in reality, but that's because I want to show you all the little bits and pieces. Let's make sure that's not moved. And keep going. We're coming up to the second seam, making sure you're following the line, making sure that we don't get any of these little ruckles and wrinkles and creases, and goodness knows what else fabric gets up to when it's left to its own devices. Okay, oop, I think we're nearly there. Let's just release. I've got a fabric caught underneath. There we go, that's better. Okay, we get to the end, do a lock stitch. Sorry, I know that was probably a bit difficult to see. I don't think you missed very much. But my camera's right on top of the needle and the foot there. So can you see now that I've got my top stitch right at the top there with the red thread, and now I've got this second line going all the way round with our second stitch line. So if you do that, I'm going to cut off those twizzles, and then the next bit is quite easy. We're going to pop our little drawstrings in. So if you get on with that, and then I'll see you in the next section. For the final bit, you need 2 pieces of your ribbon or twine, or you want a thick yarn, and they're both about 16 inches long. You can have a bit longer if you like, and you want to get a safety pin and put it through one of the ends. I wouldn't go right close to the end because all these ribbons and strings and things like this have a habit of untwizzling and fraying, but get it through there. And then we want to find one of these side holes. Remember these gaps that we left? We want to get our safety pin in, and this is why you folded that little 1/4 inch fold right at the beginning. Do you remember that? So that this sits out of the way and we don't have a raw edge. So I'm going to get my safety pin in one of those holes and feed it round using my fingers and thumbs. And when we get to the other hole, we want to go straight past it, if you like. So we're not stopping at that particular station. We're going to come all the way around. Oh, by the way, if you're thinking, oh, I won't bother with that second stitch line, do bother with it. I have tried this without and it doesn't work because your twine falls down. So we come back to the first hole and we poke our safety pin out. Okay, so they're coming out the same hole. Let's get the ends matching. And if I do a bit of pulling and evening it up, so that's one side, I'm just going to fold it over and put a little half knot in it. And then we get the second piece and we do the same thing. Okay, pin at the end. We're going to put this bit of twine in the hole on the other side. So that's the first one we put in. We're going to go in the hole on the other side and do exactly the same thing. And there you have it. So you pop your sweets in, and when you pull both sides, you'll find that there's your drawstring. And when you put your gift inside, all you're going to do is just put a little knot in it and then make it look all very pretty. And that is your very festive drawstring bag. Absolutely great for gifts. So have fun and make that and let me know how you get on. And watch out over the next few weeks because there will be some more Christmas decorations and Christmas things to make. I hope you've had fun making that and I will look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.